The blue blur was doing quite well for himself in the early to mid 90s. The games were selling well on the Mega Drive/Genesis. An arcade game would be released and bestowed the Hedgehog and his pals with their first ever voice clips in a Sonic game. 8-bit titles saw their fair share of fans, and there was not only one but 2 animated television shows airing in the West. If you had a TV set in the mid-90s, there was scarcely a time where Sonic the Hedgehog wasn't being shoved in your face. One game console at the time that was rather popular, especially in Europe and UK territories, was the Sega Master System and later the handheld Game Gear. Chances are, if you were a Sonic fan that didn't have the funds for a 16-bit console, this was the next best thing. Fitted for these buggers were a multitude of 8-bit Sonic games, not always standout titles, but still something for fans to enjoy in between mainline releases. As of now on this channel, I've covered 2 games on these 2 systems, Sonic the Hedgehog, a tricky but extremely enjoyable experience and a perfect companion to the Blue Boy's debut game, and Sonic the Hedgehog 2, a title with a constantly sliding scale of difficulty which only veterans seem to have no issue with. And now, in this video, yeah, let's talk about Sonic Chaos, you guys. So this 8-bit Sonic game, called Sonic and Tails in Japan, saw itself in quite the impasse for the fandom. It's not that remarkable for its placement in this series, which is fair, considering it was sandwiched between more popular, widely discussed platforming titles. Like, I've seen how peeps online treat Sonic Chaos dismissively, outright overlooking the game, or, in situations where it is extensively dissected, included alongside one of the more popular ones, like how Some Call Me Johnny did. It seems the game is only interesting if placed alongside other ones. Not to me though, as naive as I may come off for the next 30 odd minutes. I think every Sonic game has something worth appreciating. Yes, every single one, and Sonic Chaos is no exception. So buckle up and take up the controller, and let's go in depth into the Hedgehog's third foray into 8-bit adventures, starting from when it was first conceived. Considered a follow-up to Aspect Co.'s previous game under their belt, Sonic 2 8-bit, this installment has the honour of being the first original Master System and Game Gear game in the franchise. The other 2 were more akin to ports, or games meant to complement the 16-bit ones, or sharing the same titles anyway. Despite the prototype of this game being referred to as Sonic the Hedgehog 3 for a time, due to it being the 3rd major Sonic title for the system, the developers felt it would warrant a rename, and also because the real Sonic 3 wasn't being worked on yet, showing the team was confident in developing original Sonic titles for the 8-bit systems, especially considering the multitude of experience they gained following the completion of their first one. Believe me, the team were determined to make up for last time and make this game much more akin to how you would imagine an 8-bit Sonic game would look and play like, especially after Sonic 2 was in the public consciousness around that time. They allowed Tails to be a playable character instead of needing to be rescued for one thing, with his gameplay offering flight capabilities, a feature the Genesis title lacked. The studio certainly upped the game's feel and the quality of its visuals. Whether they succeeded or not, I'll save for later, but the dedication to learn from their mistakes and create a proper 8-bit Sonic experience cannot be undervalued. They made sure their game covers were up to snuff too. The exclusive Master System box art is much more accurate to the game it's based on, especially compared to the Sonic 2 one with its bizarrely off-model enemy artwork. Sonic and Tails are hopping over South Island with some boss robots overlooking them, and its simple background and composition gets the point across fine. I'm uncertain of the identity of the artist who drew it, but looking at the box art of other games, this seems to be the only Sonic cover in this specific style. The Japanese box art for the Game Gear ports, quite like the pair of Sonic 2 ones, is a white background with the main character's artwork placed over colourful abstract shapes. Also, the last cover art that Akira Watanabe did for the series, so hats off to him. Love how the negative space leaves behind the shape of an emerald, and the Sonic & Tails title is just the kind of visual nonsense I live for. The box art in the West, drawn once again by the late Greg Martin, features all the key players in the story, and Sonic smashing his way through blocks on a pogo stick. It's better than the one they were originally going with, although I still rather enjoy how dynamic Sonic and Tails look there. Dr. Robotnik is once again drawn with dark pits for eyes, which was so common a design choice in the Western Sonic market that his appearance in both cartoon shows would work that into his character design, with the addition of ominous red eyes. I like that, and I enjoy how the Archie Sonic comics handled it pre-reboot, but that's going off topic. Curiously, regardless of the fact that it was made for the Master System first, that iteration would only be seen in PAL regions, as well as Australia and Brazil, with the Game Gear version seeing a worldwide release soon after. Because this is the version most fans had played, most of my footage will be of the Game Gear port, though I will address any changes from the original release when we come to them, because I am obsessed with covering every detail of a thing and I will not leave a single stone unturned. Would you believe me if I said Sonic Chaos has 3 different stories? Actually, that's not specific enough. Due to the different localizations across consoles and regions, it actually has 3 different variations of the same story, reworked within the game's manual. There are common threads between them, namely that Dr. Robotnik has a Chaos Emerald and is causing an imbalance with the other 5 that leads to South Island beginning to sink into the ocean. That's word for word the plot according to the Japanese manual for the one on the Game Gear. The narrative is otherwise the typical stop Eggman from taking over the world plot, where either Sonic or Tails go through several zones, bopping robots on the head, including some bigger ones as bosses, and confronting the good doctor at his hideout at the end. A side note, but I rather like the Japanese manual. It's all written from Tails' perspective. A big thanks to Sonic Retro for translating it. You guys are the real heroes. The original European manual for the Master System version states that earthquakes were caused by new zones suddenly coming into being, with this phenomenon spreading to the rest of the world if the MacGuffins are not brought back together. The Chaos Emeralds are also housed in this mysterious North Cave, though no such place exists in the game itself. All these details just really makes the plot more complicated than it really needs to be. On a more practical side, the US manual for the Game Gear version has the big bad intending to use the Chaos Emeralds to develop weapons of mass destruction, the emeralds ending up in an alternate dimension instead of the special stages. As far as I'm aware, Sonic Chaos is the only installment with such notable story alterations between releases and regions, and the one in the Japanese manual is the version which official material refers back to the most. Alongside the story, the way the game plays is all tried and true, especially to those familiar with the 8-bit game prior to it. The hardware and engine appears to be the same too, with significant but minor adjustments. Every zone is split into 3 acts, a boss encountered in the 3rd one, and you have to finish the level before 10 minutes pass or you'll die of boredom. After hitting start on the title image, it brings you to a character select screen to pick which dude will be along for the ride. Sonic's gameplay has the standard difficulty, with faster running speed, the spin dash which is shared with Tails and making its 8-bit debut, and a variation of the super peel out from Sonic CD, here called the strike dash. The Hedgy boy doesn't turn his speedy legs into a figure 8 shape this time, and like before, the move functions the same as the spin dash, but without the defensive ball form. Sonic is also the only one who can enter special stages, which I will go into later. Tails has an overall slower maximum speed, but he offers an easier playthrough, considering he starts the game with 5 lives and 3 continues, when compared to Sonic and the usual 3 lives and 0 continues. The ending you get in his campaign is the good ending by default, but missing some graphical overlays. Tails possesses the ability to fly with his twin fluffy appendages, though the way you achieve that and how he handles is a little more cumbersome. Instead of the way later platform games will have you immediately pop into a flying animation in mid-jump, keeping up your acceleration as you either repeatedly tap or hold the jump button again, in Sonic Chaos you need to stand on the spot, press up on the controller, and let Tails slowly become airborne. It breaks the natural game flow and feels more like controlling a drone rather than a playable character in a video game. I didn't find much use for it personally, unless I wanted to reach higher areas. I'm no programmer, but I imagine they didn't yet finalise how this flying butt would play with a controller, and it would be tricky to implement it on 8-bit systems in the early 90s. In the Master System version, the zone title that appears at the beginning of every act incorporates the colour scheme of the ones in Sonic 2 for the Mega Drive, with a funky typeface and axe number along with some arrows for good measure. In the Game Gear version, they are even more Sonic 2 inspired, what with the use of zigzag decals, just with a smaller font style and the lack of an axe number. Presumably because it would have made the small screen even more cluttered, but it's still odd that they would omit that. Both versions are not quite as visually impressive as including an eye-catching illustration with the typography having the scenery breeze through it, but at least it's familiar. For the Game Gear anyway, Sonic Chaos plays near identically to Sonic 2. The camera still shifts in front of you if you're facing that direction, though there is thankfully very little complex platforming involved. Loop-de-loops are accessible two-way, an appreciated fix for those walls in the previous game. And while this isn't much of a problem, the frame rate tends to chug here and there, even when there's not many things on the screen. Like, you just be platforming and then it suddenly just slows down out of the blue. I assume they were still optimizing performance, but didn't have the time to fix any lag. But again, it's just a minor issue I felt I should acknowledge. Also, if you're enjoying these kinds of retrospectives from me, by the by, be sure to like, comment, and hit that subscribe button to send your support. It goes a long way. In gameplay, rings are the traditional pickup the player character collects, having one or more of them allowing you to tank a hit at the cost of them scattering everywhere before they disappear. They appear in boatloads in this game, be it rows across long stretches, or in bunches of video monitors tucked away off the beaten path. The reason for this is because these special stages are activated immediately when your ring count reaches 100, instead of a gate being available when reaching the goal or checkpoints. Lampposts have been omitted for the second time in a row, although the lack of difficulty doesn't really warrant them. Only Sonic can enter special stages, and thus this changes the whole game to a slow, careful crawl at times, especially with the limited screen resolution, because one stray badnik or spike is enough to make you lose all of your hard-earned rings. Although the levels and difficulty of the enemies are adjusted accordingly to make it less dangerous for the player. There are also large rings in this game, which are only seen inside some versions of the special stages, which is a bit of a sudden swap. They give you 10 rings instead of acting as gateways, as they are also seen spelling out the names Shinma, Ray, and 500, which are the names of some of the game's designers. I do remember seeing similar hidden names in some areas of Sonic 2, which I neglected to mention until now, but I assume they're the same guys. On the subject of item boxes, they hold the usual goodies inside: 10 rings, 1-ups, invincibility sparkles, and speed-up shoes. However, we have a couple of new ones officially introduced in Sonic Chaos. Time stop monitors appear in some special stage maps, causing the countdown timer to freeze for a couple of seconds after being struck. I guess that unused one from Sonic CD found some use after all. The other one is a character-exclusive power-up, the Rocket Shoes, only available to Sonic. They give you temporary flight as a short few seconds track plays, and while a little slippery in their movement, they're useful for reaching higher areas or skipping most of the level's hazards. Just watch out for bees. They are also put to use in 2 of the special stages, which thankfully gives you infinite flight. Tails is underage, so he cannot use the rocket shoes, and the item boxes containing them are replaced with regular ring monitors. Spikes are a common obstacle, strewn about the zones and occasionally sliding in and out of the ground. One notable change is that, like the springs in Sonic 2, the spikes have a different colour scheme depending on what zone they appear in, though ceiling and moving ones still retain their regular white colour. The same can be said for the dash panels with their Genesis appearance. They appear in some zones to boost the player character forward. One new sight seen in a couple of stages are Pogo Springs, a power-up touted so frequently in the marketing that it appears on the sodding box art and promotional images. For something so praised, it doesn't find much use except for reaching higher ledges in small areas, allowing you to hop off at any time. You can control it by moving back and forth, though you can easily collide with walls and get knocked off if you're not careful. It is also notable that in the Simon Y prototype of Sonic 2 for the Genesis, a Pogo Spring looking monitor was actually conceptualized, though whether it was just a regular spring or if that team considered a similar power-up is anyone's guess. Bonus plates once more replaced the end of stage goalpost, as with all 8-bit platforming games in this series. This time they are fixed so that the Robotnik panel shows before spinning it, instead of spinning a nondescript goalpost and making it land on the big bad as if you were working for the guy. The way you get the different faces are varied between zones, and describing them is a long, arduous task, so I'll just be a jiffy. While the picture it lands on by default is a flicky head, it can also land on a ring, which gives you an extra 10 rings, and is gotten if your ring count has a number 9 in it, or a multiple of 10 in some zones. This is also the only animal appearance in the game. Having 16, 28, 32, 44, or 58 rings, or 18, 36, 45, 81, or 89 rings, makes the bonus panel land on a blank, requiring you to flip it again. It will land on Sonic if your rings add up to 55, 65, 77, 88, 95, 97 or 99, or 11, 33, 77, 87, 94, 96 or 98 in some zones, or Tails if you have 18, 30, 40 or 60 rings, or no rings, 24, 28 or 72 rings in some zones. Depending on the character you play as, you get a 1-up if it lands on your own face, or a continue if it's on your partner's. Ooh. After passing the goalpost, there is an additional calculation to show how fast the player character sped through the level. It's a little superfluous, but it's kinda cool getting an idea on how speedy your character was via a speedometer. Special stages, or the parallel universe according to some manuals, are relatively simple to access. When playing as Sonic and you collect 100 rings in any of the first 2 acts of a zone, a little confirmation jingle plays and you are immediately warped to one of 5 obstacle courses. They are each designed to challenge your platforming prowess, as you either fly across a map, hop around on the pogo spring, or navigate through crisscross tube mazes. Whether you complete them or not, you are automatically whisked to the next stage once you're out of there, and like in Sonic 2 for the Genesis, they have to be completed in order to proceed to the next one. There are 5 courses to nab the emeralds in, the 6th and last one being collected after destroying Robotnik's Turkey Walker after having gotten all the others. For the Hedgehog's campaign, this grants you the good ending of Sonic Chaos, which has Sonic running inside giant reflections of each of the Chaos Emeralds. Neatly parallel to the name of the game, huh? Other returning level gimmicks and details include a lot of springs, air bubbles in the game's underwater stage, and conveyor belts. But you probably knew that already. So with the general overview of the gameplay and story out of the way, let's take a look at all the details within the game. The characters are the usual band of dudes, but at least it's not just the Sonic and Eggman show. Our Speedy Rat is his usual blue self, being one of the 2 playable characters to choose from. His sprites have been updated from 8-bit 1 and 2, being slightly bigger, the size of his eyes being reduced to show off that scowling forehead of his, and his hurt sprite looking more like he got betrayed by someone eating the last chili dog. His idle animation when you wait around for too long was also kept from Sonic 2, a detail I approve of. In both versions of the game, there's a code that can be entered in the secret sound test menu that allows Sonic to perform a Hadouken. That's pretty cool. And in the Game Gear version, there's also an animation of him falling flat on his face in the bad ending. Tails is finally playable in an 8-bit game, and with the ability to fly too. As clunky as it may be, at the time this was the best and only way to fly like a foxy helicopter in these games. Not counting underwater areas, however, this kid hasn't learned to swim yet. His sprites are as cute as they were in Sonic 2, especially the idle animation. It's just so nice to see him. Dr. Robotnik returns as a guy seen only in cinematic scenes and at the endgame. Compared to previous installments on these systems, his sprites also have more defined features, and while they look overall less simplified, along with the Eggmobile that's in the shape of a sharp-edged square, there's a little personality lost. I won't say that the sprites of the Hedgehog's arch-nemesis are limited here, but they're definitely not nearly as expressive as in Sonic 2, like, this bugger was bouncy as heck in that game. Along with spikes and bottomless pits and the like, badniks are the main obstacle when collecting rings in this game. And due to the system the games run on not being good at handling much on screen, little animals do not escape out of them when defeated. While their appearances are a tad more detailed than before, especially in their artwork with the soft gradient shading, they are gameplay-wise at their least threatening in this title. It's clearly by design. The devs wanted to make up for the last game's high difficulty, and with one of the campaigns requiring you to collect 100 rings, it would be annoying if the programmers decided to stick like fricking slices in there to impede your progress. It just won't make for an enjoyable experience. There's also the least variety in enemy designs I think I've ever seen in a Sonic game, except perhaps the arcade game, which made sense because that was designed around hazardous courses rather than bopping badniks. It's worth noting that Sonic Chaos's enemy roster had a bit of a naming dilemma, primarily the boss robots. Included alongside regular badniks, English-speaking readers had to contend with some pretty peculiar name translations when reading Sonic the comic. Yeah, Fleetway Editions weren't just known for publishing comics based off of Sega's game library, they also did reviews and articles on them too. It's here where 90s readers got some of the more casually unremarkable names for these things, such as the Robo-Snake, Spring Snail, and the Egg with the Deadly Center. They're not meant to be accurate, more like titles a bored editor might have attached to them. Oh right, I completely forgot Master Robots returning as bosses. It's probably just something buggers like me care about, but with their creator, I was disappointed in how little the bosses emoted this time. They had funky little pain animations whenever they were harmed before, which was a very minor but humorous visual. The only one that comes close to that level of charm was the second to last one, and even then it's only for a split second. Like, you can barely see it. The enemies are otherwise very expressionless and derpy, which I understand is the norm with badniks around that time, except in Sonic CD, but I can't help but pine for what I thought was a quirky little design choice. At least the sound effect when you hit Master Robots is pretty neat. It's like you're beating up a pinball table. Master Robots aren't mentioned in the narrative or in the manual except when covering the boss robots, so narratively they aren't presented as the elite Chaos Emerald collecting threats they were previously. They don't even have Master in their names anymore, which I feel minimalizes their importance. Back to badniks, I shall share the Japanese names of these enemies and boss robots, alongside the names made concrete thanks to the Encyclopedia. Boing-O-Bot, Bane Mortoda in Japan, are a variant of the Motobug badnik that possess a spike on their back, because the team just loves the hell out of these bouncy things. They also come in 2 colours depending on the zone. Beaten is a name given to a Buzz Bomber variant. They lack offensive capabilities and thus cannot shoot any projectiles, though they do hover on the spot to be a nuisance. Metal O-Turtles, despite their name, are rhinoceros beetle robots. They do nothing but roll back and forth sluggishly. Frogger is a lawsuit that I'm glad never came to be. They hop forward like the batter peons of Sonic CD. Veg-O-Bots, I'm noticing a trend in these names here. They are peculiar badniks with a large horn on their head, making them vaguely resemble a banana. They move forward and like to jump with joy. Mecha Hyokos return from Sonic 2 8-bit. Though they go unnamed in any manual, they clearly are the same badnik but slightly elongated. Their only tactic is hopping back and forth, except in the boss where they go after you and require 2 hits to defeat. Bomblin is a bomb badnik which will explode into harmful pellets if approached. The Ladybug is the name of the first Master Robot fought in the game. It's basically an enlarged Boing-O-Bot that can tank a couple more hits. The Beadworm is a giant caterpillar looking badnik that can form a tower out of its segments and toss them at you. The boss has its number of hit points vary depending on what tube you enter to reach it. Bouncy Boss Robot, or Hopping Egg Vulcan in Japan, is an Eggman looking mech with a spring attached to the bottom. It is notoriously quick and can use twin machine guns to keep you on your toes. The Tree Crawler, Kamado Max in Japan, climbs up and down a tree and can fire up to 2 different types of projectiles at you. In the Master System version, you also had to deal with a pit directly under the boss with some spikes in it. Spherobot is a bizarre egg-looking guy whose battle has multiple phases. First with the Mecha Hyoko robots, then with it bouncing around, until finally it's just a lower body which launches the baby chicks as missiles. Certainly one of the harder boss fights the game throws at you. The final boss is Robotnik in his Laser Walker mech, which is basically the Eggmobile but with long legs and a gun that shoots 2 types of lasers. One of them ricochets around the screen. Phase 2 of the battle removes the legs and has the flying pod inflate a little and try to ram the player character. One last wallop is enough to destroy it for good. That's all well and nice, but I suppose I should now talk about the levels and the game's soundtrack. I sorely miss the Sonic CD composers, but that's not to say that the music in Sonic Chaos isn't as good. There's a couple of interesting tracks, with Kojiru Mikusa and Meisayuki Nagao of Team Aspect taking the composing reins. The former would be a very frequent contributor to the music of future Game Gear titles, while the latter, who had been a sound designer for Sonic 2, would stick around here and there until after Sonic and Knuckles. There's a slight difference in certain level themes between the Master System and Game Gear versions. I'm totally speaking from an amateur's point of view, but there's a little bit of added flair, and generally, every song has one moment that sounds more improved musically. And in the case of the second one, Gigalopolis, they rewrote it and composed a wholly different track for the background music, which in my opinion is the superior one anyway, so no complaints here. Some of the game's OST was meant to homage and contained remixes of Sonic 2 8-bits, with the title screen even featuring the exact same tune as the one on the Game Gear in both versions. There are other examples of reused leitmotifs within the music, and I'll cover them as I go through each of the game's levels. Turquoise Hill Zone is where you begin, A palm tree filled paradise with long stretches of ocean in the background, as well as springs fricking everywhere. It's the Chaos Emeralds, they have to have done that. There's not many notable details about the aesthetic, except there isn't actually anything turquoise coloured, that the corkscrews from Sonic 2 are here, and the music is upbeat but lacking. The tile set is way better and more vibrant in the original version. Gigalopolis Zone is sort of this game's answer to Starlight Zone, if it were futuristic and full of skyscrapers and more construction sites. It's here where slanted ground first appears, where you can run across it but will fall straight down if you stop or lose speed. The music that plays in this level is on par with most of the soundtrack, decent but doesn't hold a candle to anything from previous 8-bit titles. The boss at the end looks like a Pokey from Mario. Sleeping Egg Zone. The zone that struck the hearts of so many that played it, it's synonymous with Sonic Chaos as a whole. The original Japanese manual flip-flops back and forth, calling it a mysterious floating island, before correcting itself and describing it as the physical manifestation of Dr. Eggman's dreams? Personally, I always thought it was an abandoned hideout left to collect dust and moss, but that's just my wandering mind. Those pogo springs are most prominent here, and Bottomless Pit dominates the lower parts of the level, and the music is as catchy and bouncy as it can possibly get on an 8-bit system. Mecha Green Hill Zone, once the iconic tropical landmark of South Island, now a sickly looking metallic nightmare with artificial grass, giant pools of sludge, and trees that drop explosive coconuts. While not outright confirmed, it appears to be the series' first example of roboticization, a concept the big bad in Sonic Sat-AM utilised to turn organics into machines seamlessly. The music is also a more ominous remix of Green Hill Zones from Sonic 2. So that's neat. Aqua Planet Zone, a rather bizarre zone, even by this series' standards. Supposedly taking place in another dimension, or perhaps being created thanks to the Chaos Emeralds shenanigans. This is the game's underwater level. An eternally cloudy sky unfolds onto the horizon, and the entire zone is made up of metallic bronze cubes and rustic pillars. Still easier than Labyrinth Zone though. The music is a little too shrill at times, but I appreciate how joyful the tune sounds. Really makes it feel like you're in another world entirely. Electric Egg Zone, the latest stronghold of Sonic's nemesis, which much more heavily resembles a giant circuit board than anything else. There are many traps here, from spike traps, moving lasers, and tubes that travel you across the map, for quite a long time. It's rather similar to Scrambled Egg Zone, with there being a remix of that zone's tune for this one's third act, which was also used in this game's intro music in the Master System version. It rhymes like poetry. Other notable themes in this game are the boss music, which has no right being this hecking good against super easy master robots, but I'll let them pop off. The final boss theme is rather neat, incorporating both Turquoise Hill Zone's theme and the boss battle music from Sonic 2 8-bit. As the first Master System and Game Gear game to have an actual final boss track in its soundtrack, I enthusiastically endorse it. The good ending music is also rather nice, if a tad too sweet sounding, and considering how easy it is to achieve it, I'm sure a lot of players got to hear it too and remember it well. Before I move on to the last topic, while some zones have beta versions of their music tracks, of course, I do want to bring up one more track, left unused in the final game, and one of which fans of 8-bit Sonic are no doubt aware of. Yep, that's Sunset Park Zone's Act 3 music, which would make a proper appearance in the next Sonic platforming game Aspect would produce. And on the subject of remembering Sonic Chaos, let's have a look at how often it's looked back on by Sega and the fans. Regardless of its status as the middle child among the 8-bit titles, Sonic Chaos has seen a fair handful of ports onto newer systems, with the original game being, of course, on the Master System. For all intents and purposes, this version is pretty much the exact same as the one I've covered, except for the fact that the screen resolution is bigger. This I will always prefer in platformers like this, insanely difficult or otherwise, because while I can get into a good game of find where the floor is or die, being able to see where the heck you're going is just a required benefit for any video game. The Game Gear did improve a couple of things too, including utilising the console's increased range of colours, which is why Mecha Green Hill Zone has a totally different background colour, and why Turquoise Hill Zone, admittedly to its detriment, was given an orange and yellow colour scheme. The whole game just looks a little different in its palette and font style, which isn't a deal breaker for me because media having different variations is a good topic of discussion. On the ports, Sonic Chaos for the Game Gear was also an unlockable extra in Sonic Adventure DX Director's Cut and Sonic Mega Collection Plus, the former requiring you to collect 60 emblems or complete 60 missions with the playable characters. Yes, even Big the Cat. Both Sonic Chaos and the 8-bit version of Sonic Spinball were included in various plug-and-play consoles. The Master System version would see an international re-release when it was ported for the Wii's Virtual Console, and the Game Gear one would again be ported for the Blue Game Gear Micro and in Sonic Origins Plus. So yeah, this version was very much in the public eye, and while its soundtrack has of course been remixed by musical peeps, the content of the game itself would nary get a mention in any other material. Archie Comics never adapted or referenced it, not even Fleetway thought to make a comic adaptation like every other Sonic game released around that period. At the time of this recording, there have been a couple of fan-made projects aimed to call attention to this often forgotten video game, such as Sonic Chaos Remake by Leica Dreamer. Now there's a familiar name. It comes with widescreen. Look at how long this stretch of land can go. This upgraded remake has a couple of adjustable features, from toggling which visuals and variations of songs you'd prefer, with some of the track's instruments made less ear-grating and more relaxing. Having Knuckles as a playable character, and special stages being accessible not only by scrounging for rings, but also passing by the bonus plate and having more than 50 rings in your possession, assuring your entry. There's also new robots added to add to the enemy roster. Look at this little guy. A very faithful fan remake if I ever saw one, and I'll be sure to link it in the description also. Sonic Chaos seemed to have been forgotten by the public, being resigned to ports and whatnot. Fortunately, there was one fan project, a demo at least, that would look at this game and go, what if Sonic Chaos, but like Sonic Mania? This fan remake, simply called Sonic Chaos, would be showcased at Sage 2020. This example of a remake ran on its own Crimson engine, and borrowed sprites and the overall sense of style from Sonic Mania. And that game is freaking awesome, so any fan works inspired by it is automatically brilliant in my book. The only completed zone is the first one, its Turquoise Hill zone based off the Master System's version, and good golly, this game looks good. Look at the view of the ocean, there's so much detail in it, and the flickering reflections too. Sonic's got a whole different victory pose. Even the Springbug badniks look neat with their added frames of animation. The Ladybug has also seen a major overhaul in its design, being a more motor-based monster truck looking robot that can only be hit on its head area, lest you bounce off its shell like a bumper. They kept the original hit sounds too, and used it in combination with the usual Genesis hit sound. It really sounds crunchy, in a good way. The level design could do with a bit of work due to it being so twisty and turny, and I've seen instances of the player character phasing right through solid terrain a couple of times, but that's my only complaint. And I can't overlook the music. The first two acts have their own respective themes, the mini-boss and end-of-level battles having funky remixes of their regular Sonic Chaos boss music. It's such a refreshing love letter to the game. They haven't updated since 2020 though, so production might have hit a dead end. I'm praying they release more demos of this game whenever they have the time. And prove me wrong, guys. Sonic Chaos was well liked at the time of release, mainly because it came out after Sonic 2, a considerably more difficult platformer that already had fans split. People who enjoyed Sonic 2 felt this game was way too easy and forgiving with its gameplay choices and simplified enemy AI, and fans who were put off by Sonic 2's difficulty were thoroughly satisfied with the changes, yet still felt this game was too short and lacked any sense of challenge. Perhaps Aspect plays too safe or corrected a perceived mistake too hard, but it is generally agreed to by fans that their later platforming games would at least provide some level of difficulty, just not in a no checkpoint die from one mistake kind of way. The game was good while it was fresh, but nowadays I suppose it's decent for a quick thrill. While Sonic Chaos is its own game and not a retread of Sonic 1 or 2 in terms of presentation and gameplay styles, I wouldn't say it's very high on my list, so a D it is. In my next video, I will be covering more of the Western releases and how the franchise fared over there. So stay tuned for the next video where I shall be talking about Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. I'll be covering my thoughts on the Sonic cartoons too, so it won't just be me talking about a puzzle game for like 10 minutes. Thank you ever so much for watching, if indeed you still are, and I'll see you in the next video.